There is something happening here. It's now or never. 'Cause there's something happening here.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Artemis Radio. I'm Colin from Artemis.
Hi, I'm Dr. June. It's great to be back.
Thank you, everybody, for coming back with us. On the last couple episodes, we talked about CBD with sleep, CBD with stress and anxiety, and CBD with headaches. Today, on episode 9, we'll be talking about international versus domestic hemp, and I'm really excited to talk about this. Dr. Chen actually just got back from China. So if you could, Dr. Chen, could you please discuss what you were doing in China and what you were researching there?
Sure. Thanks, Colin. So before I discuss China, I just want to, give everyone sort of an overlay, a foundation on why I went to China. So for me, practicing in the U.S. for over a decade, working with CBD, working with cannabis, working with patients, I saw that there was a really, really big problem. The biggest problem is the cost of CBD. It's through the roof.
Agreed.
And, CBD really should be as available and as affordable as aspirin. Okay. So, instead, a few doses a day can cost patients easily $100 a month. Some of my seizure patients are paying upwards of $1,000 to $1,500 per month.
Wow.
For CBD. So that's really just not sustainable.
And there's no insurance coverage on that or anything to begin with, too.
Everything is out of pocket. Absolutely. And when we look at, the Farm Bill just passing in 2018, so we do have this movement towards hemp, CBD hemp. The problem is for the last 80 years, it's been illegal to grow hemp in the U.S. and in Canada, right? So there's a lot of catching up to do for the U.S. And right now you have demand exceeding supply. And the dispensaries in the U.S. and in Canada just can't get enough product, okay? And this is not going to change. Another thing is that the extraction equipment is very expensive. When you look at extraction equipment in the U.S., upwards of $4 to $5 million per machine.
Wow.
In Europe, it's even higher. But in Asia, it's a fraction of that cost. Then you look at labor and land costs in the U.S. It's cost for electricity, cost for water, other resources is really, really high, especially if it's grown indoors, right?
Yep.
And there's no global distribution in place because it's been illegal in the U.S. for the last 80 years. So hemp, CBD hemp is currently spot traded. So the prices fluctuate a lot. And for the environmental impacts, and a lot of people don't realize this, but for every kilogram of cannabis, so when you purchase a kilogram of cannabis that's grown indoors, it releases roughly the same amount of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere as 3 million U.S. cars.
Wow.
And this is just a kilogram. It's crazy. And we don't realize this. We're talking about cannabis and how it's, non-GMO and it's organic, but think about indoor cannabis and the resources that it's using, the impact on the environment. There was this huge study in California, and it was talking about how the cannabis industry is threatening forests and wildlife.
Okay.
In California. So a lot of the cannabis farming in California uses so much water. What they started to do is it's diverting the streams and the water sources. So if this continues in the way it's going, it's going to wipe out the salmon population.
That is okay.
So that's why I said there's got to be a better way.
It's very harmful on the environment then only too.
Exactly. There's so many different obstacles. There's so many different things at play here when we're looking at North American agriculture for cannabis and hemp. So I thought, why not look in Asia? I thought about Colombia and Jamaica. I have ties to Asia. I'm Chinese. I have family there. So we started to look at the province of Yunnan.
Okay. Where by chance is the province of Yunnan?
So China is huge. China's like 2 Europes, right? Yunnan is on the western side of China. So not the eastern industrial belt that we're familiar with, like Guangzhou, that's where Walmart is.
Okay.
A lot of those industrial factories or plants are on the east side. On the west side, near Laos, Myanmar, Vietnam. So we're very close to that golden triangle on the west side. The weather is very different. It's mostly farmland. So it's almost like the Napa Valley, I would say, of China.
Okay.
Not a lot of factories. A lot of the botanical medicines, teas that you gets imported into North America are from that province, from Yunnan province. So there's two provinces in China that are allowed and regulated to grow hemp. It's Heilongjiang and Yunnan.
Okay.
That's
Those are the only
provinces.
two that are.
So for the last couple of years, my brother and I have been traveling to Yunnan to get to know the farmers, to get to know basically the cannabis cultivation processes there, and they've been growing it for thousands and thousands of years. It's the birthplace of cannabis, China and Kazakhstan.
I think hemp is one of the, I don't want to misquote, but 50 original medicinal herbs too in Chinese culture, correct?
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's fascinating also too. So they've been doing it forever, basically too.
They are the master growers.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
When they basically, the farming techniques that they use there, are they similar to here in the US, or are they much more traditional in their techniques, kind of how they cultivate the hemp products also?
That's a great question. So in China, it's a very rural area, very large mountainous area. There aren't large machines. Everything is done by hand because the roads are so narrow. You can't even get huge machines up to the road. So everything is done by hand. Everything is sun-kissed. Everything is grown outdoors. They have about 4 harvests a year because the rainfall, because of the weather, is just so amenable to agriculture. It's I don't know if you remember that movie Shangri-La, but
Sounds familiar.
that movie is based on that area
Oh,
in
okay.
Yunnan. So it's sort of this you like basically paradise, and China's never portrayed that way, and I didn't know about that part of China until I went there, but it's just the soil is so rich, and infused with minerals that it's red.
And I think it's really great that they're using a province that's not also an industrial province that's known where all these big industrial kind of factories are because of that, once again, can maybe lead to the soil. And from our previous discussion, we were talking about, we know that hemp is a great bioremediator. So I find it fascinating that in your book, you had mentioned that on the site of Chernobyl, they had planted hemp to help pull some of the toxins out from the soil because it had done such a fantastic job at that. And that what we see here is that the hemp here in the United States, we have to be and internationally, we have to be very careful with what heavy toxins and metals are in the soil to begin with to plant this crop because we see it coming up in all of our products that come later on, is what I've noticed also too.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
As you see products coming in kind of from China and from overseas countries, does the U.S. do a good job on regulating these products, or would you say that China and these countries themselves have their own regulations in place of how they test for these products too?
That's a really good question, and that's something that I researched heavily. So there's two regulatory processes. There is the country where it originates from. So China has their own regulatory oversight, and then products that come into the U.S., they get tested again. So just to give you an example, 90% of the world's pharmaceutical medications are produced in China.
Oh, wow.
90%.
That's fascinating.
So that's your high blood pressure medications, your diabetes, your asthma medication, all that comes from China. And if you look at your supplements, your nutraceutical industry, 75% of those come from China. So if you look at like the Whole Foods 365 line,
Yeah.
those vitamins, those supplements are likely from China.
Oh, okay.
China makes 90% of the world's vitamin C, and vitamin C is in everything, your tea, your drinks.
Yep.
So a lot of it comes from China, and they have the FDA has offices, US FDA has offices in China that does inspections for these different pharmaceutical companies, for these different nutraceutical companies. So, the major players, Pfizer, Novartis, they're all situated in China.
I found when Wendy and I have been doing our research from the hemp, it's just very interesting to see what different companies kind of using what different techniques for their farming and different extraction processes too, and even to go into those extraction processes. Are you seeing that most products, when they arrive here in the United States, they're already extracted or raw products, or is it more just the raw hemp extract that we're getting here in the United States?
So they're exporting not the biomass itself, but they're basically processing it. So in Europe or in Asia, they're processing it so that they coat it as a resin, like a phytoresin, but it is either the oil or the isolate, powder isolate, or sometimes they have basically like almost like capsules. They'll pre-formulate it for you, and then they bring it in bulk supply.
Do you see more CBD being a pharmaceutical commodity in China, or do you see more whole plant kind of holistic medicine in that sense?
I think there's room for both. I think there is room for keeping the whole plant, the natural herbal remedy of cannabis. But if you're looking at, physicians or pharmaceutical industry researching it more, they're going to need something that's standardized, that's broken down into its molecular parts, so that they can really research the pharmacokinetics, the physiology behind it, behind the receptors. Why is it working for tumor cells? Why is it working for epilepsy? You really need something that is can be replicated in a clinical trial. If we tried to do a clinical trial through plants in Oregon, through different chemovars and strains in Oregon, we're not going to get the same results in that clinical trial if we took plants from Florida, right? Because of the different microclimates, and you're familiar with that growing up in the Midwest.
Yeah.
Things taste differently at your farmer's market than this farmer's market
that
here
is
in the
that
village.
that is very true. I remember growing up there. Obviously, lots of cornfields in the Midwest. I grew up in Wisconsin. For a lot of you that don't know, and I always remember going to farmer markets. Even when I visited California, I'd always go to the farmer markets, and the food is much different when you eat and taste fresh vegetables from a farmer's market from what you're getting at your grocery store. That goes back to, once again, a lot of major, for instance, there's basically 6 major companies, right, that own the seeds distribution in the world. So a lot of these products that you're getting from are from 1 or 2 basically major companies that are distributing these seeds for these GMOs that wind up in a lot of these big supermarkets. But these small farmers are more sourcing heirloom seeds or very special seeds. So a lot of
That's
farmers
why.
and chefs, actually, Dan Barber of Blue, here in New York, he does a really great job of sourcing and making seeds also too.
Oh, wow. So that's why those tomatoes are juicier.
Yeah, exactly. Also the
Oh my
seeds and
gosh.
just the farming practices too. And
Okay.
what I found interesting too is when I was looking at, I just find pure hemp cultivation fascinating, was the differences of why people were going versus greenhouse versus outdoor grows. So I was wondering if you could also just kind of touch on the topic of what you think versus an indoor grow versus an outdoor grow and the benefits of both, kind of.
If you look at the cannabis industry in California, for example, there's actually a market for the sun-kissed grow, for the outdoor grow. If you look at the bud, it might not be as pretty as an indoor grown bud, but it has a lot of different cannabinoid profiles than the indoor plant. So I think there's definitely, there's what's that dispensary called, Harborside in Oakland?
Oh yeah, the
Yeah.
one in San Francisco, the Bay Area.
Yeah,
I'm
so
familiar with that one.
they're actually marketing the outdoor plants as a reserve
Oh, okay.
instead of the indoor plants. So you're actually like, if you get the first cut, the first bud of the outdoor sun-kissed plant, it's actually looked upon as like a reserve, like a wine.
Do they notice that the tests produce higher cannabinoids and higher terpene profiles, or do you notice one's higher than the other, would you say, also? Versus
I
indoor
really
versus
can't
outdoor?
comment if one's higher than the other, but
Okay.
I know the cannabinoid profile is different based upon how you grow it, the microclimate, how you handle the plants. I do find that smaller farmers, smaller cultivators that really are high touch to the plant, that really treat each plant individually, do seem to do better with testing and cannabinoid profile than those that are doing it, in massive scale. Again, this is an ag tech business,
Yeah.
so I'm sure there's a steep learning curve for folks in North America.
I mean, exactly. And I was discussing recently. I was on a bachelor party trip for my brother who's recently getting married, and we have a family friend who I was talking about owns about 12 to 1,500 acres in Wisconsin,
Wow.
and I was talking about him about what would get him to grow hemp. Like how can I convince him to grow hemp? And it's a large startup kind of cost, whether you want to go indoor versus outdoor. You have to make sure, obviously, that your soil testing is really good. But I was trying to argue with him that since plant is such a great bioremediator, that you could just get it into your crop cycle that you're already using right now. For him, it's mainly corn and soybean. But what if you just introduce hemp into there? And then also, I wanted to get your opinion on. I know there's kind of two markets from what we're seeing established. We're seeing a lot of companies and CBD companies using all aerial parts of the plant, which means the stalk, the leaves, and the flower of the plant. Do you think that eventually, as we go further down, more of a medicinal kind of market where they'll kind of more cultivate hemp as they're doing cannabis right now to produce these high levels of cannabinoids? Or do you see one market? So would there be more of an industrial market for hemp and a medicinal market, or do you think there'll be one general market?
I think it'll split off. There'll be a fork in the road. And, for the more medicinal hemp, you have to grow it and treat it like your marijuana plant. And that's how you can cultivate the most CBD out of it. Smaller batches, trying to get that higher yield from that plant. Versus industrial use, you're trying to make building material, clothing, rope, canvas. Hemp seeds, that you buy at Trader Joe's or Whole Foods, I think that's going to come more from the industrial side.
And also, too, there'll be more feminized pants, basically, then, yeah, okay, for the industrial market in that sense. Or, sorry, the medicinal market in that sense.
So for your family member, I mean, what was his reasoning about not rotating to hemp?
It's mainly because he doesn't know, I don't think he knows the startup cost of what machinery would be used and whether or not his machinery that he has now, because they've invested so much in the seed production, the machinery, also the silos that they store all their feed in. I know he would have to invest in warehousing for drying space also during harvesting season of this hemp. He was also worried about security, if he would have to put a fence from people coming and trying to steal the hemp. So he thought of a very clever idea of pointing corn all around the outside and then putting the hemp on the inside. So from the outside, you would just see the corn, but you'd have the hemp on the inside. And then also the licensing. His farm's actually based in Illinois, and we just realized they recreational legalized actually a couple weeks ago. So that was a topic I was talking to him about, if he was going to get into that, whether or not he would be willing to step his foot in the market. And I think it's just more of a general education. They really don't know about what farming techniques are needed. So I think the more, small farmer communities, if they saw benefits to farming this plant and cultivating this plant, they would. But right now, I think they're only focused on sticking to their practices.
That makes sense. I think you're right, because there's a lot of growing pains. There's going to be a lot of bumps for these farmers because it boils down to inexperience. They're very experienced in growing corn, soybean, and wheat, and that's what they do best. That's why I looked at places like Asia and Europe, because they've never stopped. I think when you think about it, U.S. just doesn't have the experience of growing hemp. So if you look at it down the line, I don't think the future unfortunately, the future of cannabis or hemp is going to be in U.S. or Canada. It's going to be much bigger, I think, overseas because of the labor costs and just because, based on experience.
I think that's all the questions that I have today on this topic, though. Thank you so much for your time, and I greatly appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Yep.
This has been fun.
Thank you, guys.